race of stonecutters, artisans, and engineers. They invented machines and built elaborate underground cities where they researched powers to rival the gods themselves.
The Dwemer are a race which have fascinated many people, both in and out of the games. Our character today is one such person, an orc who has been obsessed with the Deep Elves for as long as she's been alive. The main skills for the build are heavy armour, two-handed and smithing. The primary purpose of the heavy armour skill is to max out physical rating, which is why you'll want to pick up multiple ranks of Juggernaut, as well as the well-fitted and matching set perks. On top of this, there's a couple of other perks which improve the character. Fists of Steel adds to your unarmed damage, making it practical to win brawls, and Conditioning removes the weight of the heavy armour you wear, helping a great deal with carry weight issues and also making you a tad more mobile. When it comes to two-handed, the perk choice is far more limited, as all you really want is to increase the damage you'll deal. What this means is you'll want to max out the Barbarian perk and also pick up ranks of Skull Crusher in order to bypass some armour with your attacks too. Final main perk is Smithing, which, and you're not going to believe this, raises the attack and defense numbers of the character. Smithing is, by far, the simplest of the crafting skills, so all you need to do is pick up Arcane Blacksmith and work up to Ebony Smithing in order to improve your gear to legendary status. On your way up to Ebony Smithing, you'll pick up the Dwarven Smithing perk, which is a great one for levelling. Craft Dwarven bows and improve them, and you'll find the skill shooting up in no time. The minor skills for the build are Archery and Enchanting. This character isn't a stealth archer build. Turns out it's more than possible to invest in the archery skill tree without squatting with a bow all the time. Instead, your bow will be a secondary weapon, and as such, investment in the tree should be minor. Personally, I'd recommend only putting the odd extra perk into Overdraw in order to gain a little extra damage. The final skill of the build is Enchanting. Nearly half of your gear is already enchanted, so I didn't want to go too hard with this skill. Instead, I just put a few ranks into Enchanter and picked up Insightful Enchanter in order to get a decent boost from the enchantments I did throw onto my gear, something we'll get to shortly. For now though, we need to cover levelling, powers, and the standing stone for the build. And which of the two standing stones is this build going to use? Well, it's not the Lordstone today, so I guess we'll have to pick the Atronach stone instead. Joking aside, there's a reason these two stones are picked so regularly. They permanently buff the defensive side of a character, making you harder to kill. Speaking of being harder to kill, every single time you level up, you'll want to invest in health. Both Magicka and Stamina can be entirely ignored. Spells are irrelevant to the character, and the weapon you will drain stamina on hits, so get used to the bar being bottomed out. No point getting the stat higher just to have it stay at 0 regardless. The power for this character is Berserker Rage. Playing as an orc gives you the greatest activated racial power in the game, doubling the damage you deal and halving the damage you take for 60 seconds. And if you can't finish the job in 60 seconds, then you're just not trying hard enough. The main weapon for the build is Stendarr's Hammer, a very strong warhammer which only has the downsides of eating your stamina and weighing at least 3 times more than anything else in the game. Seriously, 100 carry weight is ridiculous, so don't expect another build to use this weapon. Fortunately, the damage is very high and the enchantment lasts a long time, although it's by no means proportional to how much the weapon weighs. Your secondary weapon will weigh a fair sight less, because it's literally impossible not to. However, the enhanced Dwarven crossbow was one of the strongest weapons before Anniversary Edition rolled around, and it still holds up relatively well. I added on the Fiery Soul Trap enchantment to it, giving it a little more usage than just fighting enemies I couldn't reach. The armour pieces I went with for the Dwemer Knight were the Brawler's Dwarven Gauntlets, Dwarven Crown of Winter, Dwarven Plate Boots, Ward of the Seasons, and Gold Ring and Necklace. The Crown of Winter has a total of 4 enchantments on it, although the only one I really cared about was improving two-handed damage by 15%. However, you also get the same improvement to one-handed damage, an extra 40 points of stamina, and stamina regenerating 10% faster. Honestly, I've kept this mostly for aesthetic reasons, as I could get a stronger two-handed enchantment if I just put it on my own Dwarven helmet, and the crown can't be improved through smithing, so it is technically weaker overall. Something which doesn't sacrifice any benefits to the base version are the Brawler's Dwarven Gauntlets, which you'll need to craft for yourself but then are just the same as Dwarven gauntlets, but with some sick-ass blades on them. In a similar vein, the Dwarven plate boots are just a variant of Dwarven boots that get an extra base point of armour, so if the quest to get them ends up bugging out, then feel free to just use standard boots. For jewellery, I'd recommend going with gold items in order to match with your armour. All 4 of the previous pieces should be enchanted with Fortify 2-handed in order to max out the damage you deal. Finally, I went with the Ward of the Seasons Dwarven chest piece, which reduces the damage you take from fire, frost, shock, and poison by 10%. I did initially plan on going with Dwarven plate armour, but the quest for that gear is particularly buggy, and meant it couldn't leave my inventory for even a second, so I wasn't able to enchant it. For quests with this character, you'll obviously need to do the quest to get your gear. This will start with Mightier Than the Sword, which you can pick up by reading a note laying on the bar in Markarth, and has 0 difficulty to it, but could be bugged, so good luck completing it! Then we have 2 quests which are really quite difficult, and which I hate and plan on never completing again. Forgotten Seasons and the Dwarven Horse. Both of these start at Runoff Caverns, a cave in the Reach to the southeast of Markarth. I'd highly recommend finding a guide to get through these quests. I would make one myself, but it would likely get taken down as I'd be screaming the C word throughout the entire thing. On top of these quests, you'll want to do any that relate to the Dwemer. Calcelmo should rapidly become your best friend, and get ready to spend a lot of time in Markarth, admiring the architecture, stealing a legendary hammer from the museum, and committing other small crimes in the interest of research. The only faction you really need to join is the Dawnguard. While fighting vampires isn't a big deal, meeting up with Serene Gerard is critical for getting your crossbow and means the 2 of you can fangirl together over the Dwemer. As a main follower for the character, I don't have a super solid choice, but I wanted to go with someone who appreciated the Dwemer at least a little bit, so I picked up the Markarth Merc, Vorstag. Kit him out with some Dwarven gear, and he'll look the part. On top of him, you'll be accompanied by other, more on-theme companions, starting with your mount, the Dwarven Horse. This is basically the whole reason I created the character, as it's arguably now the best mount in the game, being unkillable, having infinite sprint, and giving you the excuse to sing Bon Jovi every time you ride around. I'm a cowboy, on a steel horse I ride, and I'm wanted, dead or alive. On top of that, you can pick up the Armoured Dwarven Mud Crab, which will follow you around, blending into the terrain and being a complete waste of space. But it does add to the theme of the character, so it's worth getting anyway. The strangest thing I'm putting in this section is the Dwarven Dronefly, which you can pick up during 4 seasons. It's an item which stays in the miscellaneous section of your inventory, so I was tempted to put it in the equipment section, but when you activate it, it becomes your follower for 60 seconds, providing a boost to poison resistance and stamina regen. Once again, this adds to the theme of the character far more than it serves a real practical purpose, so you could always skip it over if you're not so much of a fan. Despite some of the extra features and complexities with the previous sections, when it comes to playstyle, things are pretty straightforward. You're a 2-handed warrior focused on mounted combat. With high damage and high defences, you just need to hit your enemies and watch them die. Being mounted makes you a lot harder to hit and more mobile, so focus on hit and run attacks against enemies who are outside. When you head into an interior location, you'll be even more of a standard warrior. Kill everyone you come across, heal up with potions when you get hit too much, and save often. If you're dealing with an enemy you can't easily hit with your hammer, then draw your crossbow and hit them with range. Crossbows are also somewhat manageable to use when mounted, so make sure to give that a try too. Combat is pretty straightforward with the character, as theme is what really matters here. You should be playing as a Dwemer-obsessed individual, doing whatever you can to find out more about the vanished race, and getting far too excited whenever you see a piece of ancient scrap metal. For as long as she'd been alive, the Orc had been fascinated by the Dwemer. Her parents initially found this endearing and promoted her hobby. They were both blacksmiths, and they were able to steer her interest into how the Dwemer made their machines, figuring it would get her to join in with the family trade. What happened instead was she became obsessive. As her parents tried to teach her smithing, she would only help with projects that had some link to the Dwemer. Eventually, their own knowledge of that race ran thin, and their daughter would constantly ask for books relating to the Forgotten Elves, or to be allowed to head out and explore ruins. Her parents, quite understandably, refused to indulge the latter, fearing for their daughter's safety. But her obsession refused to disappear. Knowing that one day she'd end up in a dwarven ruin, they decided to train her how to fight, in the hope she wouldn't be unable to defend herself against the automatons who still defended the long-abandoned ruins. And so they spent several years making sure she could handle herself. Unsurprisingly, when she came of age, she left her family behind, and went out on a journey to explore as many Dwemer ruins as she could, starting in Skyrim. In her naivete, she thought her journey to the ruins would be the easy part, but the Civil War had recently hit its peak of tension, and ended up in the middle of a fight between the two sides. While not fighting anyone herself, she ended up lumped in with the Stormcloaks at the end of the battle, and thrown aboard a cart. While this wasn't the perfect start to her journey, she's sure that things will brighten up once she gets to set foot inside of the ruins that litter the lands of Skyrim. There we have it. Sorry it's taken me a while to get another Anniversary Edition build out. If you follow me on Twitter or have seen the community posts, then you'll know there's been some road bumps with builds coming out, but I still am hoping to have a few more released before I'm done for good. In the meantime, feel free to check out my other content. For the month of January, I'm trying to stream regularly, and I've recently been doing some Skyrim survival streams. If videos are more your thing, then I've got a best of playlist with some of my favourite videos I've made. There's also a playlist of all of my Skyrim builds, and plenty of non-Skyrim content listed around the channel too. As always, thanks for watching. Sarge out.